Well, good afternoon, friends, or evening if you're in the UK like Brooke. Wait, it's evening there, right? It's not morning? Yes. Sometimes the way the world spins confuses me. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Perspective Shift, or as is so currently titled, but I keep telling you, I'm going to change the name. I have the name, I just haven't yet done the rollout for it. And part of that is because I wanted to get through Pride Month and my Pride Month conversation series, which, as you can see today, I'll be joined by none only than the man, the myth, the legend himself, Justin. What's his middle name? Lee. Put your guesses for his middle name in the comment section. I'm curious. If anybody gets it right without knowing it, don't Google it. I don't know. I was going to offer you a prize, but maybe that's not the right move to make. Anyway, today on the show, I'm going to talk about 4 stages of owning your privilege. Okay, so this is something I started writing about last week. The idea of privilege is something I've been thinking about, thinking about and learning about a lot for the past number of years. And I thought, hey, as I dive into, like you just saw in that promo video, launching these brand new UnClobber courses, and we're in Pride Month, I'm like, now's a good time to sort of talk about this concept of privilege. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but if it's new for any of you, hopefully some of this is helpful. And then after we talk about that for a bit, then we're going to go over to talking with my friend Justin. So I'm looking forward to hanging out with you today. As always, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here. Every one of you is loved and you belong. Let's do this. Marcy, so glad you're with us. And to answer your question, isn't this a great hat? Okay, so the backstory on this hat is this. The platform that I use to do my live streaming shows, I stream my own show here. You're watching Perspective Shift. My wife and I stream the Kate and Colby show using this software. And then also my church, Sojourn Grace, uses this platform. And it's called Ecamm. That's with 2 M's, Ecamm, Ecamm Live. And actually, if you're watching this right now, you can scroll down to the description and get a link if you're curious about it. But Ecamm is the software that I've been using for about a year now to do all my live streaming. And we've gotten to know each other a bit, them and myself. And a couple weeks ago, they reached out to me and they said, hey, we know how much work you do as an ally in the LGBTQ community. We're creating these Pride hats for Pride Month with our logo. Can we send you one? And I said, I would love that. Send me your hat. And it came this week. And actually, y'all, it's a pretty nice hat. It's kind of got the trucker thing going on, and my pretty little Pride logo there with their Ecamm icon. Anyway, so I've been rocking the Ecamm. And then check this out. Wait for it. I'm gonna back up so you can see. Look at this new shirt I'm wearing. Do you see it? Do you see this shirt? Do you recognize? Do you see what's going on there? This is a little holler back to my series on all the names that I get called. One of which most often is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And now I have a shirt for it. Thanks to my friend Karen Gilmore, who designed it. And you know what? You can get one too if you want. I'll put the link somewhere sometime. But right now, this just came this week, and so I'm stoked about my wolf in sheep's clothing and my Ecamm. Anyway, so what am I, just a walking billboard today? Yes, I am. All right. If you are watching on the YouTubes, would you do me a favor? If you want, this is always optional. You can click subscribe. You don't have to. It's just the way that I invite you to participate in what I'm doing here. And if you're watching on the Facebooks, you can like my page. And also, we have a first guess for the middle name. Justin, is your middle name Bruce? Justin Bruce Lee. Logan really hopes that it is. So that's our first guess. Yes, Shane likes the hat. And Melanie, it is a nice hat, isn't it? So make sure to follow Ecamm Network and say, I like your Pride hats. And then Mercy would like me to tell them to send her one. I'll see what I can do, Merce. Yes, Odette likes the shirt. All right, Odette, I'll let you know where you can get one if you want. All right, let's get into today's, the subject matter for today. And then we'll get into the latter half of the show, talking with Justin Lee. All right, so 4 stages. This is what the title of today's article is. And you saw it scrolling across the bottom, and many of you know what Perspective Shift is. Perspective Shift is my free weekly newsletter that you can get by going to colbymartin.substack.com to sign up, and I send that out every Wednesday. And last week, I started this little mini series on the idea of privilege, and just wanted to explore it a bit with you and see what kind of comes up in this space. And so today, I offered what I've titled for, I don't know if it's the best way to phrase it, but 4 stages of owning your privilege. And so that's what I want to get into with you for a bit here. And as always, feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comment section, because I see them all on the Facebooks and the YouTubes here. All right, so let's get into this. And it starts like this. Last week, I wrote about the glasses of privilege. And the main idea was to imagine that each of us, when we're born, through a combination of nature, so it's things like our biology and our ethnicity and our personality, etc., mixed with nurture, so where we're born, who raises us, the values in which we're raised within, through all of that, we all are given like these glasses that inform how we see the world. And then I suggested that various kinds of what are called privileges are like the lenses that sort of get put inside of our glasses, layered on top of each other. And each lens of privilege lends a certain degree of ease to the owner because the world in which that person lives in has been bent to favor that specific lens. And then I love how Marie Beecham, great follow on Instagram, puts it like this. She says, if this helps, think of it like this. Privilege isn't bonus points for you and your team. Because we talked about that last week, how often this resistance to privileges. I don't have privileges. My life's been hard. You don't know what I've gone through. That's not really the point. Privilege isn't bonus points for you and your team. It's more like unfair penalties that the other team gets that you don't. I think that's a great way to think about it. So seen in this way, with each lens of privilege, it's as though you are inoculated from particular kinds of societal penalties. Penalties? It's a new word. I just made it up. And then also each lens, so in addition to how sort of society is bent into your favor, and it's like an asset to you in that way, although an unjust asset, each lens also distorts how you see the world, making it really, really hard to see how life is experienced or can be experienced from other, specifically non-privileged people's perspective. I mentioned this last week, but my glasses contain multiple lenses of privileges, including but not limited to my identity as heterosexual, white, cisgendered, male, middle class, able-bodied, educated, and so on. Which means that on one hand, many aspects of the world, and in this context, specifically America, works really well for me. Right? The systems are designed to work well for me, to work in my favor, or at least they are less hard for me than others. Again, Beecham's idea of penalties that I'm not being given, I find to be helpful. But it also means that without a lot of intentional effort and work and humility, I can be embarrassingly blind to the experiences of women and people of color and LGBTQ people and so on. So one of the areas that I've tried to do a lot of work in, and still have a lot of work left to do, is to figure out how to best steward these many layers of privileges that I possess. And there's a little note here that next week I'm going to talk about an article that suggests that this language of stewarding privilege can actually be like kind of complicated and not really helpful. So they're basically saying don't talk about it like that. Now, for me, I still see value in this term and this concept of stewarding privilege, so I'm still going to use it, but I'm also open to alternative ways to thinking and talking about it. So I'm not totally sold on this. It's just, for me, communicates what I'm trying to say for now. The idea here is not to feel guilty, okay? The idea here is not to just feel guilty for being a straight, white male, for me. And that's often the straw man argument when people want to either deny that privilege is a thing or get defensive about the fact that they may have it. So you just want me to feel guilty for being this way? That's not really the point. Although those feelings, pay attention to them. We'll get to that in a minute. But rather, as I understand it, the goal is to gain awareness and understanding of what privilege is so that you might be a more compassionate person in general and a more effective advocate for social justice in particular. To explain that a bit, consider the following 4 stages of development when it comes to owning and stewarding your privilege. And I'll just pause here to say a couple more hellos. John Carl Lewis, so glad you're here. Phil Spencer is hoping for Bustin. So he's hoping that Justin's middle name is Bustin. Justin Bustin Lee. All right. So we've got a couple submissions here for what is Justin Lee's middle name. Oh, good, Shane. I'm glad you're here. Glad that resonates with you. Ben also coming in hot for the love for the Ecamm Pride hat. Oh, and then thanks, Mercy. Mercy took care of linking on Facebook at least to get your wolf in sheep's clothing shirt as well. All right, so stage one. Oh, hi, Amy. Coming in with a late greeting. Good to have you here. Glad you. What's your cat's name? I think that's a cat. Could be a badger. Do you have a pet badger, Amy? All right, so first stage of owning your privilege, I'm calling learn. Stage one, learn. I touched on this a bit last week, so I won't belabor the point here, but the whole thing's got to start with becoming aware of what the concept of privilege is and how you might be a possessor of it or of them, lots of them. For example, white folk. Do we understand how our country came into existence intertwined with systems of racial injustice? Do we understand how our history is littered with unjust policies that discriminate against people of color, causing generational complications? Do we understand how being white in our country shields us from so many, quote, penalties, like prejudicial attitudes and opinions and laws and policies? On the average, it is easier, don't argue with me, it is easier to be white in our country than not. And we, white people, don't often understand this or understand how it is that we got here. And then we just keep perpetuating many of the harmful ideas and systems and cycles that got us here. Or to the fellows watching, do you understand how the world treats men and women differently and how these differences can often lead to unfair benefits just because we're guys? And we can break down each one of these identity markers in this way, but the point is learning about this stuff matters. If you are more privileged or in more privileged categories, do you understand why? Because I think we have a responsibility to understand why that is. So education is where it starts, stage one. Then stage two, listen. Next, close your mouth and open your ears. Seek out stories and experiences of those who do not have your specific privilege. And I listed a few links there that I found helpful. Like if you want to know a bit of what it's like to be a person of color, check out Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. If you want to know a bit about what it's like to the differences between men and women or cisgender and transgender, check out Paula Sloan Williams' new book, As a Woman. Read what it's like to be a gay person or a lesbian person, especially within a home or a community or a world that doesn't accept you. Highly recommend our guest today's book, Torn by Justin Lee, or Out Love by Julie Rogers, who's actually going to be with me in 2 weeks. So in this second stage here of listening to the stories, once you've educated yourself on the kinds of privileges that you might possess and why that is and how they came to be, now seek to understand the experiences of those who do not have the same lenses in their sets of glasses. As Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, understanding leads to compassion, and then compassion leads to love. If your goal at all in life is to be a better lover of other humans, and I hope, if you need a purpose in life, I just gave you one, become a better lover of humans, then you must understand them as best as you can. All right, stage three, and this is kind of the largest portion, and then we're almost done here. So armed with a bit of education around why you might be privileged and how that impacts others, and then how that impacts others by listening to their stories, then you might naturally get really excited to like jump into the fray and start trying to make a difference. All right, put me in, coach. I'm ready to go. And what's the saying here? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that applies in this work really acutely. And I've been there. And in my own way, I may probably still be there in some way. In fact, I'd wager that most people who enter into this space of social justice have been there too, where we rush in to start saving the day, but we haven't really done the necessary stuff in this third stage, where really the sole purpose is to just sit for a bit with what we've learned. For people like me who thrive on doing stuff and getting things done and productivity, this stage can feel agonizing. It can feel unnecessary. Like, what? No, I know what I got to do now, and I'm just going to go do it. Truth be told, I'm still pretty bad at this stage, this sitting stage. I jumped to that fourth stage of action just naturally and with great gusto. But I'm learning that we have to sit with the reality that what we have, we what we have, what we do. And I don't know if I wrote that right, but the point is we got to sit with the reality that our lives are this combination of, yes, things like hard work and hustle and determination. And also for many of us, combined with that you have certain advantages granted to you through no effort or work of your own or deserving of your own, just by nature of how or where or when you were born. Like sitting with that really does matter. We have to let that sink in. Again, not because you're just supposed to drown in guilt and just give it all up, but at the same time, if and when you do find yourself feeling bad, feeling sorry, like that's part of it. Those feelings actually belong too. Those feelings are normal. That makes a ton of sense because it can be real disorienting to confront how you might be maybe a little less responsible for all your success in life than you've always assumed. It's super normal. And two, like, I think fully feeling your feelings in life, period, is just good. But then also for this particular conversation, again, it's not about guilt, but maybe it's about conviction. Maybe it's about that drive to be like, damn, when I'm ready and the time is right, like I want to do my part to change things, to make things different. Anyway, so sit with the stories of the marginalized is this stage 3. Sit with the stories of those who are discriminated against. Sit with the non or underprivileged. Let their stories impact you. Let them undo you. Let them change you. I think the value in this stage of just sitting with it cannot be, actually that should be overstated, cannot be overstated. It often is understated. I'll edit that later. Because I think there's a cost. There's a cost to be paid for moving too quickly past this stage. For instance, because this particular stage is meant to be uncomfortable, like, what? You want me to just sit in the tension? I know things now, and you want me to just do nothing? We're tempted then to numb the pain through action. That hurts too bad. I just gotta go do something. And anytime we do something, I think this is true. I wrote it, but I could be wrong. Anytime we do something from a place of trying to numb the pain, we run the risk of doing more harm, because when you numb one emotion, I'm pulling from Brene Brown here, when you numb one emotion, you end up numbing all of them. And that might mean we actually become less empathetic in our work, less understanding. Does that make sense? We have these feelings, these feelings of guilt and ick and shame, and we're just like, oh, I don't want to feel this way. I want to do something to get rid of these feelings. And so we do what we can to try to make a difference in the world. But if it's driven from a place of just trying to make ourselves feel better, then we're actually inhibiting all of the emotional set. And we need all those emotional sets to be present and effective in the work. We need empathy and understanding and compassion. We need all those things. And if you numb one, you run the risk of numbing them all. And then we just lose all the juice that we gained from stage 2. And then when this happens here in stage 3, you might hear this phrase, maybe you've heard it before, of centering your pain or centering your experience. And so us privileged folk are often guilty of centering the white experience or centering the straight experience or centering the male experience. And although I have a bit of pushback to that idea, that phrase, but that's for another day. I also at the same time recognize it's a real thing that happens. And it's a real thing that I have done. And it usually happens when a person doesn't sit long enough in the tension and the discomfort required to truly let what you've learned in stages 1 and what you've heard and experienced in stage 2 sink in. So when a privileged person, armed with a dose of awareness, charges forward with a desire to do good, but they're not yet fully equipped because they've bypassed the necessary wisdom gained via the sitting in stage 3, the work they aim to do can become more about them and their experience, hence the idea of centering. And at that point, I'm not sure we've actually gained any ground on the justice front. And in fact, it's possible we've gone backwards. So before we privileged folk go charging off to change the world, what I've learned from people who do this work and do it well is that we first must spend time sitting with and letting the realities of stage 1 and stage 2 sink in. And I'm with you. That's not easy. And the timing of it, and I'll talk a bit about this next week, the timing is unclear. Sit for how long? I don't know. I don't know. But I can look back, and actually here's a note here. I can look back and be like, oh, okay, I can see how it didn't sit long enough there. Yeah. So here's a little parenthetical statement. Part of why I'm doing this series now is because it's June, which is Pride Month here in the States, and I've launched my new UnClobber online courses. And the truth is, when I reflect on how when I first started this UnClobber work back in 2012, like a decade ago now, I can see how I rushed right past stage 3. So I got fired from my church in Arizona, and I was armed with just enough knowledge in the clobber passages to be like, all right, I'm ready to take this thing on. Let's do this. Let's start the blog series. Let's start the teaching lectures. And then when I wrote the book in 2016, I still don't believe that I sat enough with what I'd learned, nor did I listen enough to the stories of LGBTQ people. I wish I knew then what I know now, which is the importance of this third stage. Quite frankly, I just didn't. All of what I'm writing and saying now is stuff that I have learned and am still learning in the last 5 years. Yeah, so I wish I knew then what I know now. Yes, I'm honored and I'm humbled that UnClobber has been effective as it has, and I can see how it suffers from having been created without me having sat in stage 3 long enough. So maybe that's part of why I'm trying to hammer home that point and practice it more gooder. All right, stage 4. We're almost done here, and then we'll bring on our guest. Stage 4. Finally, as I understand it, now we're ready to kind of do our best, and that's the emphasis right there. Do our best. You're not going to be great at it. You're not going to be perfect at it. You're gonna bungle it at times, but we do our best to take the privileges that we have, and I don't know how else to say it. Use them for the betterment and flourishing of others. So that might mean things like leveraging our access. It might mean things like harnessing our resources. It might mean things like taking advantage of the fact that we have less penalties holding us back and we frickin' work for a more just and equitable world. Like, do shit now. But what this looks like and how it all happens and what sort of ways, like that's going to look different in every context. And I hope to explore that a bit more next week. And again, I'm speaking directly to us privileged folk. I'm learning just how important it is to understand and honor. Listen to this now. It's important to understand, again, back to the education, and then to honor that more often than not, this work here in stage 4 is really already underway by marginalized and less privileged people. Like, it's been happening. Oftentimes, us privileged folk are late to the game, and it's already in the 8th inning. And so when that's the case, we would do well to partner with or support the work of, or in any other way, avoid just stepping in and exerting ourselves front and center. But when that happens, and it will, trust me, it's really common, we are invited to once again return back to stage 2 of listening, learning, and stage 3, sitting with, so that we can see how we missed it and to try to avoid doing it again. And next week, I'm going to share some thoughts about how this 4th stage is just complex and nuanced, man. Like, this work ain't easy, and everyone's got their own and different ideas about the best and the right way to do it. And we might charge ahead after having maybe felt like we've done the first 3 stages. We might charge ahead and do some actions and then get immediate feedback that that's not the right way to do it. But that feedback might only be coming from a portion of any given community, whereas another portion of the community might be like, no, actually, that's really great. We're really glad you're doing that. And that's really confusing. So part of this is like, if we don't have some thickness of skin, some strength of backbone, and some soft, like Brene Brown, I guess I quoted her twice now, strong back, soft front, right? Where we have this sort of openness, this gushy vulnerability, but then a strong back to like not let the criticism take us out. We're not going to be all that effective or long for this work. Anyway, that's next week. So that is what I had to share with you today as I talk about the 4 stages of owning our privilege. And then I invite you, if you want to go to article on my Substack page. I'd love to know what you think about those 4 stages. Am I missing one? Does there need to be a 2A, 2B, or does there need to be a stage 5 and something needs to get moved? Or do you just not like my stages at all, which is totally fine? And maybe how have you noticed your own self going through a journey like this with a given topic, or your growing awareness around these privileges? I'd love to know what that's been like for you. All right. We'll get rid of that iMac. It's an old iMac too, by the way. We got these new fancy iMacs. I've got a pink one ordered. It's going to come in July, and I'm really excited about it. And then I'm going to have to update my little graphic here. Get rid of these old 2019 looking things. All right. Anyway, we already got rid of that. Checking into some of the comments here. Oh, good. Yes. Oh, look at this. Amy says, thanks for the recommendations. Torn was the first book I read on my quest to understand LGBTQ group. It's a good read, wasn't it, Amy? When your cat's name is Sugar. Ben was really hoping it would be a badger. Hey, Daniel James. So glad you're here. I'm so glad you're excited. Although that emoji makes me feel like you're conflicted. You're excited, but also it's painful exciting. I don't know. Ignore me. Yes, sitting with the discomfort brings enlightenment. Thank you, John Carl Lewis. I appreciate that. Oh, here's a good one. Melanie says, I just started Oshida Moore's Dear White Peacemakers this week. She writes about white privilege and is working to help us all bridge the divide. Also, yeah, Paula Stern Williams. It's a great book. Hey, Jules, you made it. I don't know if everyone's doing well today, but I'm doing well today. So I can just speak for myself. Yes, I agree. Bill Cal. I'm also glad to be talking with Justin. He's a great spokesperson who's lived through a lot. In fact, without any further ado than I've already done, would you join me in welcoming to the show, Senior Justin, middle name we'll find out in a second, Lee. And we're here. All right, Justin. First things first, man. What's the middle name? And if the answer is actually my parents didn't give me one, I'm only gonna be slightly sad.
Hey Colby. So I think I'm going to plead the fifth on that one and
totally
keep
fine.
Keep the one shred of privacy that I still have. But I will say, of the guesses that people were submitting earlier, I like Bustin the best.
Bustin's solid.
So, let's just, let's make that canon.
I like it. We'll keep the depth of the truth mysterious and private for yourself. And for those who need some answer to mystery, you may have Bustin as your response.
Yeah.
Justin.
Do Bustin. I like to do as much myth busting as I can, so it works.
I love it. You're drinking from a Mario pipe.
Absolutely. So
that makes me happy.
My website, for folks who don't know, and my screen name on a lot of different social media is Geeky Justin, because I am a huge geek and I have been, since I was a kid. And you can't see all of it, but I have my sort of wall o' geek behind me. It's a combination of books and
right, give us
random.
Tell us about 3 things behind you. I'll go to a slightly larger screen. Tell us about 3 things behind you. What do we got?
Yeah, I got some Portal coasters here, and I've got All Might from My Hero Academia up here, and what else do I have? Well, you can't quite see. I've got Link right over here next to a signed Scott Pilgrim poster. So that's 4. So
that's cool. So Link was the only thing you said in that series of things that I knew what it was. Like a Link.
Well, I remember that one. That's the thing with geek stuff, though, is it's all about obsession with something that not everybody is as into as you are. I find if you're a geek about enough things, there's something that somebody's going to go, oh, I know that one.
That's cool.
I've got one of my only pop figures here, Mr. Rogers, is right
Fred.
there. And I actually think it's Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers from the movie, but I have so much respect for Fred Rogers. The documentary about him that came out a couple years ago, I just thought was really fascinating, and so I thought he deserved a spot on my geek wall. So
I love that.
So yeah, I've got the geekiest mugs you'll find anywhere.
That's so fun. I have a hunch that at least one, if not more, of my children are heading down your path of geekdom. I have one child who is going to school next year specifically so that he can learn Japanese because he wants to move to Japan and just be inundated in the world of anime and video games and just that whole, like, that's just his jam. So I don't know.
Well, then ask him if he knows who All Might is, because I feel fairly confident that he does.
I will. I'll ask him. Well, that's pretty much what we came to talk about today. So thanks, Justin, for joining us. I'm just kidding. Hey, so I've been doing this thing. Thanks for joining me, by the way. Thanks. I know I thanked you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is fun. You're a gem. You're a gem that I regret having not crossed paths with earlier. I don't know if regret's the right word, because I didn't really have a lot of choice in the matter, but I'm sad that we haven't known each other longer is the point. And I look forward to maybe one day, now that we're post-COVID-ish. California opened yesterday. Side note, California opened back up yesterday, and our family went to SeaWorld because my mom got us passes. And Justin, it felt really good, like, to be out in the world with some people still had masks on. It was still there. Obviously people can do what they want, but it wasn't required. And you could see people's face. You could see strangers smile again. My wife kept reflecting on, like, you can see people smile. I miss that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're kind of, I think you're in Florida though. So you never really had a COVID situation, did you? There's no post-COVID for Florida. It was just like,
no,
what?
There definitely is. And it's, I resonate with what you said. I found myself, I find myself continually getting a little bit emotional every time I get to do something that feels more like normal. You don't realize how important some of these little things are until they get taken away. And, I am thrilled to see things creeping back towards normality. And yes, I also wish that we had more opportunities to talk. So I'm glad we're getting to talk now.
Likewise.
In front of an audience.
In front of an audience. All right. So I sent you a few questions ahead of time just as a way to kind of get us going. Because part of what I'm hoping to do in this portion of my show for the month of June is to just host conversations with non-straight folk. Because Lord knows people get enough of me. Too much if you ask some. And part of the framing that I've been is like, what are the gifts of being queer, gifts of being LGBTQ? And last week I had Ashton Colby on, who's transgender, and he was a phenomenal gift to those of us who listened to him talking about the gift of being transgender. And eventually I'd like to ask you about some of the gifts of being who you are. But maybe to start there, since we are in Pride Month, I'd love to know, what do you remember about your first time celebrating Pride? And you can take that however direction you want, with whatever level of vulnerability you want. But tell me about your history with Pride.
Yeah, so it's so interesting when you ask that question, because I had to stop and reflect. I think it's so important to remember, as you've been talking about privilege and marginalized communities and all this stuff, I think it's so important to remember that no group is a monolith. And this is a great example of that. When I first realized I was gay, and, went through the process of coming to terms with being gay as this, committed, devout evangelical in a Southern Baptist church in the American South, I didn't feel, even after coming to terms fully with being gay, I didn't feel like Pride represented me at all. I eventually did go to a Pride event, and by now I've been to more than a few of them. Uh, but it wasn't for me an experience of, oh, these are my people. It was this weird kind of foreign world. It's, you know, LGBTQ folks sometimes joke about, and I think a number of marginalized communities do, sort of joke about this idea of your membership in the group.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like musicals, so I'm going to take away your gay card, that kind of thing. And it's partly a kind of humorous reflection on the fact that we're not all the same, despite the stereotypes that we have, which may have some truth to them. We're not all the same. And so there's no point at which, when you come out, nobody gives you the gay agenda and says, here's your planner book, here's the agenda that we're all following. um, it is sort of a gradual process of discovering who you are and where you fit into this community, into this space, and into the broader world. And for me, as this very devout evangelical, the word pride itself
Yeah.
was not something I wanted to be
Lots of
associated with,
baggage
because
there. Yeah.
yeah, well, because pride is a sin, right? If you're Catholic, it's one of the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to make the connection that when we talk about pride, we actually mean 2 different things. There's pride as the opposite of humility, which is a sin, and there's pride that is the opposite of shame, which is what people mean when they talk about
Yes.
LGBTQ
Come on
pride.
now.
It's saying, I'm not going to be ashamed of myself.
Yep.
It's the kind of pride that we mean when we say, I'm proud to be a Christian. I'm proud to be an American. I maybe bad things have happened to me, but I'm still proud. That's not the opposite of humility. That's saying, I am not going to spend my life cowering in shame for things that are not my fault, or for just because of who I am.
I love that. And I wondered so I imagine that was a process of revelation to get to those sort of distinguishing markers between those two. And I loved how you framed that, because it really would be more helpful maybe if we had different words, but we got what we got. These are the words we have. Were you surprised when you came out? Were you surprised that you maybe didn't resonate right away with pride? Like, was there a part of you that was like, all right, I'm out now. Here comes pride. This is for my people. Oh, I don't feel like, was there tension there for you? Or did you kind of know right out, even when I come out, like, this isn't going to be my path?
Well, it's sort of the other way around, because when you grow up hearing things about gay people for many years before you realize that you're gay, at least for me, it wasn't as though I grew up knowing these were my people. I grew up knowing what gay people were, and they were nothing like me.
Okay.
My stereotype of gay people, those people are nothing like me. And then I realized I was one of them. So it was more like trying to figure out, where did I fit into this space that felt so foreign, as opposed to growing up expecting that this was going to be the community for me, and then realize, oh, something doesn't fit. And what I gradually came to realize was that a lot of the stereotypes that I had about gay people, or about LGBTQ people more broadly, were not accurate. But it took me time, because I, had spent years and years and years hearing all kinds of negative things in my family and in my church and in my community about gay men. And so it took me a long time to even be able to say that I was gay. And, to this day, I know some Christians who I would describe as gay in terms of my definition of that word, but they don't use that word for themselves because they don't fit the stereotype that they have of what gay people are like.
Wow.
So it was a process of reevaluating my own stereotypes Being in a marginalized group doesn't mean that you don't still have stereotypes about your own group sometimes.
Mm, yeah, that I can imagine that's not an easy pill for some people to swallow. I'm reflecting on how what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling like I mentioned this in the article that I read a bit ago. Like there's I don't know what the percentage is. There's a good chunk of people who fall in these more privileged camps that have a lot of resistance to this concept of privilege
Mm,
because they don't,
mm,
well, it could be a number of reasons. One of which might be they're not prepared to, maybe not consciously, but not prepared to confront that these things are real for them. That there is ways in which they have been unfairly uh, prioritized in culture, whatever it is.
mm,
So I'm conscious of it as you share that even within marginalized communities, that does not inoculate the person from holding these stereotypes or these potential prejudices. But that as I'll say this as an outsider to marginalized groups, and I think I feel comfortable saying that. I can imagine that would be how painful that would be. So to confront one's own negative stereotypes and prejudices that are reflecting their own sense of identity. I don't know. I'm even sort of struggling to articulate it. It's just as you said it, I'm like, damn, that sounds extra layers of challenging.
yeah, I mean, I think this is what I eventually came to realize why LGBTQ people talk about pride. Because um, in many marginalized groups, you have to face the um, the negative views of people outside of your family, of people in society at large. But in many uh, kind of categories of marginalization, you are very likely to share that category with your family. Now, this isn't true of every group, but if we're talking about race, if we're talking about religion, um, very often these are categories where at least your family is kind of in the same boat. For LGBTQ folks, um, that is very often not the case. And so you can grow up hearing from within your own family a lot of negativity towards who you are, and you may have a lot of negative views about yourself before you even realize it's
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
And so LGBTQ people, certainly not uniquely, but we do often struggle with that sense of shame when we realize who we are, that comes from within ourselves as well as our communities and our churches and our families. And so that's what pride is, I think, really a response to. It's not only a response to, you know, what does society say about us? What do other people say about us? But it's also a response to our own negative feelings and saying, no, you know what? I'm not, I'm not going to be held down
yep,
by this.
yep,
And that's why sometimes I think, in pride events, you see some sort of over the top
sure.
outrageous behavior, because it is sometimes a, a, a way that people are just trying to make a statement to themselves as well as to the rest of the world.
And why not? This is
Yeah,
what like
sure.
I I can understand to a degree because I kind of used to be there at least theologically. It was a long time
Mm,
ago, but I can understand at least theologically. But I can understand to a degree the I would argue more conservative position of the resistance to the pride parades and especially as you said, maybe the more outlandish or just out there demonstrations of it. Like I can understand to a degree that sense of isn't that a bit much? Isn't that a bit unnecessary? And I remember this was I remember after the jury came back and decided to not, or they decided to acquit the officer who killed Michael Brown, and the ensuing riots and looting in the Missouri area. I remember for the first time the weight being hit on my heart, if that's an okay way to say it, of Colby, you have no idea how you would respond in a situation where you have spent a majority of your life, maybe all your life, with the boot of some system on your neck. You have no idea how you would respond in that situation. Like how I just felt this. How dare you criticize people for responding with such like force and emotion and intensity when I'm like, no, let's just do this. You have no. So anyway, as you talk about
Yeah.
that sort of demonstrative or just over the top, it's like, yo, straight people, you have no idea what it's like to have, for so many years of your life, for many of these people, this deep repression, this self-hatred, this external voice from family, religious community, in many ways, culture that says hide, shame, gross, abomination. You literally can't imagine then what it's like to have a release valve for that. Like, how dare you then criticize and judge that the release valve of that is not how you would do it? Well, who cares how you would do it? I don't know. Anyway, so
Well, and there's a psychological principle at work here where we tend, as human beings, when we see somebody else's behavior, we tend to attribute that behavior to something uh, about the person. When we look at our own behavior, we tend to attribute it to our circumstances,
context. Yeah, that's right.
to context. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, all of us react differently in different situations. Um, but if you're a sports fan, you certainly know that the rowdy behavior of some sports fans uh, after a particularly important game or something like that is not how those people behave all the time, nor is it how all sports fans behave. Um, we understand that if people act a certain way on Mardi Gras, that doesn't mean that that's how they dress and how they live, every day of
Yep.
their life.
Yep.
And the same thing is true whether people are reacting in anger to a situation like you're describing, or whether people are reacting in celebration, in a pride event or whatnot. What we're seeing is a sliver of these people's lives in a particular context, and it's
Yeah.
important to understand the rest of the context.
Well said.
That was something that it's a long conversation in response to your one question, but that was something that took me a long time to understand about myself, because I saw these images of men, in rainbow thongs, marching down a street, and said, well, that's what gay men do, all the time. They just march in rainbow thongs. And I have to tell you, I don't know if I lose my gay card for this, but I have never marched or gone anywhere in a rainbow thong, or any color of thong. Um,
Yet,
so that's
growth
just,
mindset. Growth mindset. No, I love that, Justin. I've got a question here, or one of our viewers has a question here. I'm going to throw it on the screen. So this was not, I didn't run this by your pre-approved people, but you said it was fine. So here's Amy's question. She said, one GCN years ago, I met people who were gay and believed it was a sin and committed themselves to celibacy. She wants to know, are there still a large number of gay Christians who feel this way? And I know this was a large part of your work early on, the side A, side B. So yeah, sounds like Amy would love to know a bit about your thoughts on that. Maybe even in your own life, how you've experienced movement in that area.
Yeah, and for anybody who's not familiar, GCN was an organization that I ran for 16 years. I no longer, but for 16 years, it was an organization that we had an online community. And one of the things that was really important to me when I started that group was to create space for people wherever they were theologically. When I first realized I was gay, I thought for a long time that I would have to be celibate. Um, that was my understanding of what scripture said. And I was willing to do whatever it took to follow Christ. It's amazing the number of people I've heard assume that because I'm gay, that this means that somehow my priority is about sex or about fleshly desires, however they define those. Uh, you know, as a Christian, my first priority is serving God. That's as true now as it was when I was growing up. So I thought I would have to be celibate. I no longer believe that, based on more scriptural study. I'm engaged now, so um, but
This is the soundtrack. We're applauding for you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But uh, but there are a lot of gay Christians who do believe that, and it was really important because those folks experience discrimination from both sides,
Yeah.
um, you know, in similar ways to what somebody like me experiences. And so it's always been important to me that they be supported and understood. Even though I don't share their theological view on that point, I want them to have support. I want them to have community. I want them to have an opportunity to do what they believe is right. I'm not going to force somebody into a situation they think is wrong. So yeah, there I still know a lot of gay Christians who hold that view, and there are organizations dedicated and books dedicated to addressing that. But that's not my view. But some of my good friends, that's where they are.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Amy. So you've been doing this work for a long time.
Yeah.
You are, in my mind, I don't know how many heads get on Mount Rushmore. I think we don't have to limit it to just 4. But you're on the Rushmore, brother, of this work of pioneering the sort of modern day movement of merging spirituality and sexuality. I wonder if you could, and I don't often think in terms of regrets, because I prefer to extend compassion to my past self, knowing that chances are I was doing the best I could with what I had. And I am where I am today, and for better or worse, in large part because of it. But I do wonder sometimes. I do often sometimes go back and be like, well, if I did have a time machine, I might do this a little bit differently. I might do that a little bit differently. So if you were to if you could go back to the beginning of when you began this journey of, well, you can go to any point. I'll let you go at any point in your journey. But I'm just sort of wondering, is there anything along the way that you're like, you know what? I wish I would have known that, or I wish I would have done that a little differently.
Mm. What do we have? 10 or 11 hours to talk about this?
Try to get it into 9. Yeah, if you can. Yeah, 9 hours. Okay.
You know, I don't know how you live and not have things that you would do differently. But one of the things that comes to mind right away is, I didn't have any formal training in ministry. I'd sort of stumbled into it. I came out and I wrote my story online, and suddenly I had people, other Christians, LGBTQ Christians from around the world, and parents and pastors writing to me and asking for my advice on how to deal with all this stuff. And I was still trying to figure it out myself. So I ended up all of a sudden in ministry, but I hadn't, gone to seminary, and I took very seriously the responsibility to read books and to study the scriptures and to get different sides of things and all of that. But one thing that took me longer than I wish it had to realize was what diversity there is within the group of folks who call themselves Christians. My experience of what Christianity was growing up was very much evangelicalism. And I still identify myself as an evangelical, although I am coming to hate that word because people have a lot of assumptions about what that means now, and it's become such a political term. But it describes the sort of flavor of Christianity that I came to Christ in. Um, I Because my experience growing up had been so much evangelicalism, I wasn't really prepared for how different the experiences, and sometimes similar, the experiences were of Christians who had grown up in, say, a more progressive mainline denomination, or Catholic, or Eastern Orthodox, or all the different ways of understanding the Bible and the different ways of understanding what it is to be a Christian. And when you are in ministry and your understanding of what Christianity is limited by your own growing up, it can create some challenges when you run into folks who have a different understanding of Christianity based on their own growing up,
Yeah.
and their understanding of what it is to be a Christian and your understanding of what it is to be a Christian
Yeah.
are not the same.
Yeah.
And you use the same word and mean different things by it. And so it took me a
Totally.
while to learn, I need to define what I mean by this term. And I need to explain what I see when I read this passage, what I think this means. And it's not saying that I think everybody's equally right. It's just acknowledging that there are different points of view, So that's something I wish I'd figured out.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with being gay, but it's something that's, I think, I guess the relevance here to the kind of stuff that you're talking about is that all of us are limited by our own experience, and we all have to listen to each other's stories,
Yep.
and we all have to listen to each other's experiences and each other's understandings. If we are too quick to speak and too slow to listen, we will say things that we think we all agree on what they mean and realize only too late that we don't all agree on what they mean, and we're not having the same conversation.
Well said. Well said. Tell us a bit about what comes up for you when I ask the question, Justin, how has being gay or identifying as gay, how's that been a gift to you in your life?
Well, growing up, I did not think it was a gift
Sure.
at all. It was, I wanted very badly to be straight. But, there's so many things. It's one of these things where I don't know how to even imagine who I would be if I were different. I mean, anybody, if you, as a straight guy, if you try to imagine who would you be if you were a gay version of yourself, it's like you can't really
You don't get
imagine it
very
because
far.
so
Yeah.
much of your life would be different. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've realized that I was growing up, I was kind of the golden child. I mean, I was a really good student. I was well respected in my church. I if I was criticized for anything, it was for being too much of a goody two shoes, So when I realized I was gay, it was sort of my worst nightmare because it was like, I can deal with peer pressure. I can deal with people saying bad things about me because I'm too good of a Christian. But like, the one thing I wasn't prepared for was people thinking I wasn't good enough of a Christian. What if my fellow Christians saw me negatively? That was the one thing I didn't know how to handle. And God has this way of putting us in situations that are like the one thing that we think that we can't deal with. And ultimately, it made me stronger. It made me learn what my faith is. What do I believe? Even if nobody around me supports me, even if my family doesn't understand, even if my church doesn't understand, the people who I thought would always be there for me, if they don't understand, who am I and what do I believe? It made me rethink everything from the beginning, and it made my faith stronger, and it helped me understand. You're talking about privilege. I'm white, I'm cisgender, I'm male. Uh, I have a good education. I have a lot of privilege. Had I not been gay, there's a lot I might not have understood about what the experience is of being marginalized. But because of that, it's much easier for me to recognize my privilege in other areas. It's not a magic, formula, but it helps me to recognize my privilege in other areas and to pay attention to the times when I'm tempted to assume that everyone's experience is the same as mine, to go, wait, well, I don't like it when straight people do that to me, so I need to not do that to people who, are not of the same race or gender or ability, or um, so a lot of things like that. And it taught me what it is that a lot of outsiders don't like about the church, and particularly evangelical churches like mine.
Mm.
I didn't really understand that until I was the one who was being preached at, and then I was like, "Hey, this isn't very fun to be."
Oh, oh, I don't really like being called a wolf in sheep's clothing, as it turns out, which I'm sure you've gotten your version of many, many times as well.
Oh, indeed. Yeah.
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 Those are three really powerful gifts, Justin, that I'm a little bit envious of. Can I share something that, like, I feel like you screwed the last little bit of a light bulb in for me on that first response when you said
Hmm.
that there's a degree in which it strengthened your faith. Okay, so the context for my 94% screwed in light bulb is this: that last Sunday and this Sunday at my church, I'm doing a little 2-part message on religious diversity within community, because one of our mottos at our church is "It all belongs." And so we've been talking about, my wife and I have been talking about for 2 months now, what we mean by that and what we don't mean by that. And so I'm sort of finishing it off by how in our church, like, it all belongs, which is to say that we have a great diversity of religious thought in our church, and how do we hold space for all that? And so I've been really inspired lately by chapter 14 and 15 of Romans, Paul's letter to the church in Rome, where he's dealing with a similar situation, a church that is fracturing along multiple lines, ethnic lines in the early part of the letter, Jewish and Gentile. And then later he then talks about the ones who have weak faith and strong faith. And the weak in faith, as I know you know, he says, there are those of you who, and he calls weak in faith, who don't eat meat and who honor some religious festivals. And then the strong in faith realize you can eat whatever the hell you want, and all the days are the same. Okay. I have felt like I've had like, I'm really excited for part 2, because I felt like I'm got something here. I'm leaning into it. I'm excited about it. But then what you said, I'm like, wait, what if that's what if that's the way to phrase it? What if that's the final? So anyways, what if, Justin, and I'm just throwing this out there, what if strong in faith, and I might take a little bit of issue with Paul's use on that, but he was trying to get at something. He wasn't saying better or worse. He was trying to name something with these 2 descriptors, strong and weak. And he identified himself as a strong. So it wasn't just Jew and Gentile anymore. We're not talking about a different way of engaging with the faith. What if the strong in faith, Justin, are those for whom their religious faith has stopped working at some point? The weak in faith are still those for whom they say, no, we need to maintain these dietary laws. We need to maintain these religious festivals. The weak in faith, their faith still worked for them. When you talk about one of the gifts of being gay is that the thing that was given to you stopped working, I realized, damn, I think about people like my wife, who lost her mom at a really young age. Her faith stopped working for her real early on. Other people who have come up against the edges, whether it's systemic or whether it's traumatic experiences or whatever it is, come up against the edges of the thing that they thought was going to work for them. It stopped working, and then they found on the other side something bigger, more glorious, more grand. What if Paul's like, that actually is the strong faith, when you come to when you realize it doesn't work anymore and you keep going? What if weak in faith is those of us for whom everything still works for us?
I certainly can't speak for Paul, but I mean, I think there's something to that. I think my experience has been that as I've grown as a Christian, my understanding of what it looks like to be a mature Christian has really shifted. That when I was younger, even though as a good evangelical, I could always tell you that, we're saved by grace and not by works. There was still very much in my mind this sense of works as an important way of showing that you were a good Christian, which I think there's something to in a but in a different way than I used to think that. I mean, in my church, it was like, good Christians, they don't go to those kinds of movies, and good Christians don't play those kinds of board games. I mean, I grew up during the Satanic Panic era, where if you played Dungeons and Dragons, you were opening,
Wow.
whatever. I still have not played Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh man.
Because that was like evil. And but it's funny to look back and go, wow, like we were really focused on these little things that I don't think matter that much compared to the bigger things of how do we treat our neighbors. Jesus says that the sheep and the goats are differentiated by, who's feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, and it's a different kind of work that he's interested in. But I've learned as I've grown that I thought for a long time that I was a strong Christian relying on my faith in Christ alone. And when I was in a situation where, because of being gay, I no longer had the support of my fellow Christians, I discovered that I was leaning on my fellow Christians a lot more than I thought I was.
Okay. Yeah.
And that it was a lot harder to just trust in God. It's a lot harder to just say, well, God, is with me when nobody else, not even your family, is there supporting you. And I love my family and we're on very good terms now, but there was a period where it was really difficult. And so, yeah, I think those things, whether it's a death or whatever, like you're talking about, it does make you reevaluate your faith. And it does ultimately, if you stick with it, strengthen your faith. But you can go through that dark night of the soul, certainly, first.
Yeah.
And you come out with a different kind of spiritual maturity than you thought you were going to end up with.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, man. I like that. All right. This has been good. We've gone 11 minutes past the time I tell my people I'd be done by, and I told you be done by. So let's just, but I like it, and I like you, and it's all worth it. So as we sign off here, maybe just tell us a bit about what you're up to these days. Is there any projects you're working on? Any books that you have recently launched or are launching? Like, if people are like, I want to drink more of the Justin Lee Kool-Aid, how can they do that?
I'm not sure I'm great with the Kool-Aid analogy, but
I'm trying to reclaim it. I'm trying to reclaim, redeem the Kool-Aid metaphor.
Well, all of my stuff is on my website, which is geekyjustin.com. That's GEEKY. I feel like I need to spell that out now every time I use it, because a few years ago I gave a talk where at the end I said, my website is geekyjustin.com, and had this gentleman come up to me afterwards and he said, did you say kinkyjustin.com?
I really hope he visited kinkyjustin.com just to make sure.
I'm scared to know if that's even a website, but geekyjustin.com is my website. I do YouTube videos that are at youtube.com/geekyjustin, and I do have 2 books, which conveniently are sitting right here and are also behind me. Torn, Rescuing the Gospel from the Gays versus Christians Debate, which is about partly about my story, but it's about the LGBTQ conversation, specifically in the context of being gay, since that's my experience, but in Christian spaces. And my latest book is this one, Talking Across the Divide, which is about the polarized culture that we live in now. And this is not a book written just to a religious audience like my first book. Talking Across the Divide is about, in this polarized world, how do you talk to people on the other side of the political aisle from you? How do you talk to people who disagree with you on faith? How do you talk to people who disagree with you on some issue that's important to you in a way that doesn't compromise what you believe, but also makes enemies into allies rather than making allies into enemies, the way that I think a lot of our social media discourse does right now. So that's this one.
Love it.
And people can always contact me on my website, and I'm happy to hear from them.
Cool. Well, Brooke says, Justin, you're so wonderful. Mercy says, thank you, Justin. Odette from Puerto Rico says, Justin, thanks for being here. Colby, thanks for bringing Justin. Thank you both for the great work you do in inclusion in the church. I have one question for you, Justin. What is your favorite mug?
Oh my gosh, it's like asking me to choose a favorite child. I have so many mugs. I don't know.
What's your favorite mug? That's fun.
I can't.
What's your go-to? How about that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. You know what?
We've really stumped him here, folks. We have stumped him. He can answer all the faith questions, all the sexuality.
I got this one. I've got this one on display. So let's say it's this one. Oh no, I knocked down Mr. Rogers.
Bye, Fred. See you, Fred.
Let's say it's this one right here. How about that?
Jules says thank you. Amy says thank you. And then Peter, I see you just threw this comment up there. Peter's referring to the gift of the live stream, the gifts of being gay. Do you really see being gay as a gift? So I think, Peter, you might have missed about 20 minutes ago in the conversation. I asked Justin that exact question. So when the stream ends and YouTube is finished processing the video, go back and check out sort of that 15, 20 minute segment about an hour into the conversation. That's a great thoughts there. All right, brother, this has been a gift. You know what? I told you I had this other scene here where you would become bigger and I would become smaller. And then about 10, 15 minutes into the show, I realized I never used it. And then I thought it would be awkward to suddenly do it. I meant to use it from the very beginning so that you would increase while I decrease, but it never happened.
I never noticed, but now that you've said that, I think
like
people are going to think that like I requested this or something. Like
nobody would think
Colby,
that.
I demand that I take up. If
I'm going to
be on your show,
if I'm going to be, I must be at least a ratio of 3 to 1 for your screen.
Right? and a bowl of green M&Ms.
Oh, all right, buddy. This has been great. Happy Pride for the rest of you. Congrats on the engagement, and I hope we do more stuff together in the future.
I would love it.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, bye-bye. That was great, everyone. Thank you so much for your engagement. I saw a lot of you had comments and questions that we didn't get to in the comment section, but it's so great. I just so grateful for guys like Justin who have been doing this work a lot longer than I have. So like when I talked about in that article about realizing that people have been doing this work long before I showed up, Justin is absolutely one of those individuals. That's why I place him on my LGBTQ and faith Mount Rushmore. All right, next week, come on back because I'm going to have Coach Yema. You know I love Coach Yema. Coach Yema has been on the Kate and Colby show, and then she was a guest speaker at our church a couple weeks ago, and then I'm like, Coach, I need you to come and hang out with me on Wednesday afternoon sometime in June, okay? And she said, heck yeah. Actually, I don't know if that's what she said, but anyway, so that's next week. Coach Yema is going to be here, and she is a spirituality and sexuality coach, and I just think she is fantastic. All right, that's it. That's all I got. Have a great rest of week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks for watching this week's episode of Perspective Shift. I'm going to now invite you to do one of 3 things, or do them all if you're an overachiever. First, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to my free Perspective Shift newsletter. You can do that by going to colbymartin.substack.com. This will ensure that each week the articles that I write arrive safely in your inbox. Second, if you're watching this on YouTube, just go ahead and hit subscribe on my channel. That'd be awesome. And or if you're watching this on Facebook, would you click like on my page? For me, this is a win-win in that it helps me know that you're out there and that you care. Plus, it helps you know when I'm going live. For all my other work, including books that I've written or sermons that I've preached, head on over to colbymartinonline.com. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me live next week.